Hi, welcome to Ms. Cooper's art class. Today I'm going to show you a tutorial on those stippled nature drawings that you might have seen around online. I'll show you some time lapses of my own and some building blocks for those. So let's think about shapes for a second. Circles are great because you can trace something, but usually a lot of those doodles have some geometric shapes that are pretty easy to draw with a ruler. One thing I'd suggest is adding a split sometimes to your shape. It just adds some drama and makes it kind of interesting. Now this example is a little different. I used the shape of the state of Arizona to make this kind of Arizona desert themed doodle, so there are exceptions to the whole geometric rule. This is your drawing. Remember, do whatever you want to do. So let's think about another building block here, mountains. These are one of my personal favorite things to do. They're featured in a lot of them. So you start with that basic outline, add some kind of cracks and splits and wrinkles to your mountain, and then add some stippling. Now my mountains are usually jagged and have a lot of peaks. I let my hand shake a little bit while I do them, but you can always make yours more gentle. Now you'll notice I'm pulling in some, I like to call them cracks, but really they're just bumps in the mountains by starting in the middle of the top of each peak. So every point should have a little line going down the middle to add depth and shape to your mountain. And I add a little more form by adding little crack lines from there. You could just leave it at that, but you could also add some stippling just to give it a little bit more shape. So when I stipple, I figure out where my light source is coming from, even if I haven't drawn that yet. And then I kind of go from the other side of my line. So if my sun is coming from the right, I will add my stippling on the left side of the little bumps and lines in my mountain. Now sometimes it'll just point away from the sun, so every once in a while it'll change direction. If you want to know how to stipple a little bit better, I will link my video in a second here to my stippling. Now every once in a while, if you're not perfect at stippling and you get a little clump of stipple dots, you can just turn that into another ridge or another dip inside your mountain too. So you can always roll with those happy accidents. They're not perfect. You're making them up out of your imagination. So just let this be a relaxing time with your own mountains. Now I'll put that aside. Let's talk briefly about additions. I also added some plants and cacti to my mountains and made the edges bolder. So that's something you can always try. When it comes to suns, I keep those simple. You could do a basic line, you could add stippling for some drama, or if you want to fill up your sky, make your rays seem big, spread them out. When it comes to water, make sure your water lines are a little closer together when they're far away. In this example, you can see that as the water goes away from the viewer, it just gets a couple more lines, a few less details. You can always take it off the edge of your shape if you want to add some drama. And remember, if something disrupts it, like mountains, make your lines closer together. Make them all disrupted and disjointed. Trees are another easy building block. You could just do small lines if you have them far away, not close to you, very indistinct. You could also make outlines that you fill with stippling dots if they're a little closer to you, and just change it depending on the lighting. And the example on the right, it was nighttime, so I picked a light source and then just made them really dark. As you'll see here, I'm going to kind of outline an edge to my tree. I'm sorry, it gets a little blurry there. And then I will stipple my lines and my dots really close together. That way it looks nice and dark. Trees are another great place where if you're not as good at stippling yet, or you tend to clump your stipple dots together, it just adds more texture to the tree. So if you end up with a clump, you could just leave it there and it will make the tree look more natural anyway. So that is always up to you. That's your personal choice. Now let's move on to one last feature here, clouds. I won't spend a lot of time on these. You can make them big and fluffy or long and flat, depending on the feeling you want to give your drawing, and you can take them off the edges of your shape to create some visual interest. Now, I don't usually do this, but you could add stippling or shading to your clouds if you want to give them more form, or if you want to make them rainy. That's up to you, but usually I don't have rain in my own drawings. Let's go through an example here. I split this one because I wanted to make one half daytime and one half nighttime. I thought that would be cool. I imagine these mountains and little peaks kind of at the edge of a continent. So they're very rocky, they're getting into the ocean, they're very jagged and pointy. But I put a couple trees in front just to fill the space a little bit more. After I outlined my jagged mountains, I split them down the middle and I added a lot of lines to make them look really jagged and sharp. and interesting. I figured out which side was day and which was night. I figured it would be a sunset, a dramatic one, where the sky was filled with the light rays and the mountains had this really dramatic shading on them. So I made it really dark or really light, depending on the side of the mountain. And I made the waves a little more jagged, a little rougher, whereas on the nighttime side, I kept my lines straighter and made some very gentle waves and wanted it to look really peaceful, so it was kind of different from the sunset daytime half. You'll notice the trees are also darker on the nighttime half, whereas the daytime, they're a little bit lighter. With the nighttime, I kept the mountains dark, I kept the shading dark, but I didn't make it as dramatic. They just kind of became shades of gray where the moonlight was hitting them instead of the bright white like I kept on the sunny side. For the nighttime side, just to make it a little more peaceful, I added some clouds and I added some stippled shading to the sky just to make it look a little bit darker and a little bit different from the daytime half. My stippling clumped a little bit under the clouds to look like there was maybe a little bit of gentle rain happening that night, but not too much. I included some shadows where the mountains were kind of hitting the water on both sides just to make it look a little more realistic, but of course it is a doodle, so it doesn't have to look perfect. And I also decided to add a little more shading to the sun to make it just look a little more dramatic. I was very happy with that one. This one I'm moving through a little bit faster. This one was simpler. I thought of some jagged Arizona mountains. I figured I would be closer to the bottom of these ones, add a couple little cactus friends to it. I figured it would be a very hot day, so hot that the clouds are just kind of squished and lazily making their way out of the shape. I thought that would make it look a little bit hotter and sunnier. And I added some dramatic shading to my mountains. This is another example of where I kind of added some extra dots because I wanted to clump it together, make another little wrinkle in my mountains. And again, if your shading wasn't quite perfect, just take that clump, darken it a little bit more, make it look intentional, and then clean up your lines at the end. And I added a few more cactus friends because I thought that looked a little bit nicer. Now this last one is kind of a go-to of mine. Usually I make it sunny in daytime, that's just more my personality, but I thought for this one I would make it kind of a gentle nighttime one. I kept my mountains a little bit smoother for the most part, and I decided to make a moonlit sky instead. I have some gentle water hitting the edges of the mountains, remembering to keep my lines nice and dark and close together. I extended one mountain a little bit farther just to add some more depth to my mountains. And then I made that third one the very background one. I split from the tops of the peak, but I didn't leave as many details in the background ones because they're farther back and we wouldn't realistically see a lot of details back there. With the trees, I just kept them super dark because I knew it would be nighttime. I darkened them a little bit more at the bottom where the moonlight wouldn't filter through the little leaves and needles as much, so figured I would do that, but otherwise I didn't include a lot of detail. And I let my stipple dots clump together just a little bit. Now my waves are a little bit rough for nighttime, but I made them a little bit smoother, closer to me, and usually I have to tilt my page to get my lines straight, so I made sure I did that as I went along. Once that was all established, I put a nice little crescent moon in the sky and some big stars for this one, and a couple clouds. Once I was happy with that, I added some stippling to my mountains, making sure to pick one particular line direction and darken my mountains at the bottom where the moonlight wouldn't touch them quite so much. Once I was done with that, I was pretty happy with my drawing. This is an example of a daytime one. I don't have a time lapse, but this is my usual style for drawings, and I usually don't include as many trees. Anyway, with that, thank you so much for watching. Please leave questions below if you have them, and if you like this, please subscribe or just give this a like. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and happy drawing!